somehow in the 70s, that decade, we were able to make pictures. People weren't talking about how much a picture was making. I mean, at a certain point, yes, how much money it would make or how much they would be able to risk. But primarily, they were talking about the new Terry Malick picture, or the new Paul Schrader picture, or that sort of new Francis Coppola film. These were films that were like, they were proud to make, in a way. They were proud to underwrite, I think, filmmakers with, and I don't want to use it because it could become a dirty word, but vision. A vision, meaning that they have a way of telling a story.
Beginning in the late 1960s, the film movement known as the New Hollywood extended the life of the decaying studio system by creating films that were stylistically in stark opposition to those Hollywood had been producing for decades. As part 2 of the series explains in detail, these films purposefully reimagined the rules and genres established during the golden age of the studio system to render a realistic depiction of the world on screen, rather than a sanitized, fictionalized version conjured up on a studio backlot. Further, unlike their studio system predecessors who had commercial intentions in mind and aspired to have broad appeal, New Hollywood films were driven by the artistic impulses of the director, who served as the author behind the film's ideas. Although new to Hollywood, this auteur-centric approach to filmmaking was deeply inspired by Francois Truffaut. In part 1 of the series, it is explained how he and the other French New Wave filmmakers who would constitute the broader European art cinema movement used it to redefine the art form. Interestingly enough, though Truffaut's work would inspire the films that would save Hollywood, now several years into his directing career and more privy to film production, Truffaut was ready to dispel the notions that defined the start of his career by saying, "These days I tend to repudiate the idea of an all-encompassing author that I propounded when I was a critic." Nevertheless, even if he does not write one line of the screenplay, it is the director who counts. It is he who the film resembles like fingerprints. His film can mirror him for better or for worse, but it is he and he alone that it resembles. Truffaut's argument here seems contradictory, as on one hand he says he repudiates the idea of an all-encompassing author, but also in the same breath he states it's the director who counts.
Well, I beg your pardon, but my English is not good too.
Instead, to better understand Truffaut's updated thoughts on the auteur theory after he had become an experienced director, this video will analyze the fiction film about filmmaking he wrote and directed, Day for Night. Not only does the film deeply concern itself with how a director works in unison with their crew to utilize their unique talents to co-author a film, but it also predicts and warns how the auteur theory's vulnerability to the corrosive effects of capitalism on artistic expression would lead to the downfall of the New Hollywood era several years before its implosion. Though Day for Night is the first of Truffaut's films to be distributed by a major Hollywood studio, it was the 14th feature film he had directed since the start of his career 15 years earlier, when the release of The 400 Blows marked the beginning of the French New Wave. According to Truffaut, he chose to direct Day for Night to highlight the part of the filmmaking process that takes place beyond the edge of the shots. In doing so, the film explores how contributions from department heads and below-the-line crew members, combined with the random events that happen during a film's production, can, for better or for worse, creatively shape the film in ways the director couldn't have imagined, let alone control. Nevertheless, though the film's depiction of filmmaking routinely stands in stark opposition to the criticism that Truffaut wrote for Cahiers du Cinéma more than 15 years earlier, by showing how the director possesses the unique authority to execute their vision through commanding and utilizing the talents of a film's cast and crew, Day for Night is, in some ways, his most concrete defense for how a director acts as the sole artistic lead of a film production. Day for Night begins laying the groundwork for Truffaut's nuanced view of filmmaking from the get-go, during its opening credits to congeal these seemingly opposing conceptions of the film production process. In this sequence, Truffaut juxtaposes the names of the film's cast and crew next to an audio waveform that transforms in response to the voice of a conductor dictating an orchestra's tempo and controlling each musician's performance down to the individual note.
Je voudrais le répéter encore le début. Bon, d'abord une attaque bien ensemble, ça m'arrangerait. Maintenant, si vous êtes pressé, c'est le moment. Bien lié tout ça jusqu'au bout, que j'ai pas de trou du tout. Voilà, et voilà, on peut y aller.
By organizing the opening film with the waveform and credits next to one another, Truffaut tells the viewer that, in the way a conductor with absolute authority uses his power to distill the contributions of many musicians into a single performance, he will similarly manipulate his cast and crew to construct Day for Night. Although simple in its setup, the credit sequence immediately introduces the central themes that Day for Night will explore, ensuring that the viewer is on the same metaphorical wavelength as the film. This allows Truffaut to begin making his case with more substantive examples in the subsequent extended opening sequence. In the first scene of Day for Night, an elaborate scene for Meet Pamela, the film being shot by the characters within Day for Night, is being depicted. As the scene unfolds, the viewer observes it from both the camera's perspective shooting Meet Pamela and from alternate viewpoints within the world of Day for Night, which reveal the dozens of cast and crew members responsible for bringing the scene to life. While all the filmmakers of Meet Pamela are working in unison to execute a singular vision, there is no indication given to who is responsible for the logistics and look of the scene, other than the director of the film, Ferrand, who is conveniently played by Truffaut himself. A few scenes later, when the viewer sees the beginning of a shooting day where Ferrand meets with Meet Pamela's production manager, location manager, producer, makeup artist, and prop manager, it is revealed to the extent to which Ferrand is responsible for the various components of the scene. During these meetings, the various crew members ask for Ferrand's input on what car should be used in a scene, to what degree a set should be furnished, how to schedule the shooting of a production, what color a character's wig should be, and finally what gun a character in the film should use. This sequence also includes a brief voiceover where Ferrand asks himself,
Qu'est-ce qu'un metteur en scène? Un metteur en scène, c'est quelqu'un à qui l'on pose sans arrêt des questions à propos de tout. Bonjour Damien. Quelquefois il a les réponses, mais pas toujours.
While all 5 crew members bring their own ideas to the table, such as various cars to choose from or sketches of a set to critique before it's constructed, like the composer in the opening sequence, Ferrand is choosing and shaping their contributions to articulate his singular vision for the film. However, this is not all that Day for Night is saying about the role of the director. In addition to controlling the contributions of the cast and crew, the film also highlights how a director must respond to unforeseen circumstances that threaten a film's production. In another voiceover from Ferrand later in the film, he explains that
Un tournage de film, ça ressemble exactement au trajet d'une diligence au Far West. D'abord, on espère faire un beau voyage, et puis très vite, on en vient à se demander si on arrivera à destination.
At several points during the production of Meet Pamela, the film leaves the cast and crew wondering if they'll ever reach their destination, as a series of unforeseen events complicates the film to a degree Ferrand could never have planned for. Nevertheless, as the captain of the production, Ferrand is tasked with resolving these events in a way that further contributes to the film's themes and does not detract from its intent. At first, these are simple issues, such as an actress forgetting her lines or not knowing which door to open in a scene, simply requiring Ferrand to coach the actress through the scene or delay the shoot. However, these problems slowly grow in size, like when an actress in Meet Pamela hid that she was 3 months pregnant. Not only would Ferrand have to devise a way to shoot around showing her stomach in a scene where the actress is wearing a bathing suit, but he would also have to revise other scenes that he was shooting 6 weeks later when the actress would be too visibly pregnant to hide. Interestingly, it's worth noting that not all the unforeseen roadblocks of production present in Day for Night affect Meet Pamela negatively. After one actress locks herself in her dressing room and refuses to film any other scenes after her husband finds out she cheated on him with another actor, Ferrand rewrites Meet Pamela's screenplay to incorporate lines of dialogue that the actress said while locked in the dressing room, aiming to bring out a more robust and naturalistic performance. The idea of production mishaps contributing to solutions that make for a more realized film is also explored towards the end of the film when Ferrand learns that he has to reshoot the elaborate scene shown in the opening sequence of Day for Night because the power went out at the lab while the film was developing, ruining all of the takes. However, before the crew can refilm the scene, one of the actors in the film tragically dies in a car accident, putting the entire film in jeopardy.
L'enterrement d'Alexandre a eu lieu ce matin dans un petit cimetière sur les hauteurs de Nice. Nous attendons l'arrivée du représentant des assurances anglaises, c'est de lui que dépend le sort du film. Depuis que je fais du cinéma, j'ai toujours redouté ce qui vient d'arriver, le tournage arrêté par la mort d'un acteur.
After meeting with the insurance agent for the film, Ferrand discovers that he has already completed filming too much of Meet Pamela, making it too expensive to reshoot the film with a different actor, forcing him to work around the actor's death. To do so, besides cutting scenes that had not yet been filmed and adjusting other parts of the film to compensate, Ferrand refilms the opening scene by only showing the back of a stand-in for the deceased actor, and sets the scene in winter, allowing snow to disguise the stand-in further. Ironically, Ferrand realizes that because of these changes, the scene becomes more impactful than he had initially conceived, and he is ecstatic with the result of Meet Pamela's production. Like Ferrand, his fictional counterpart, Truffaut also had reason to celebrate the film he made.
Je suis content que tu sois content.
Day for Night, upon release, was received exceptionally well by American critics such as Roger Ebert, who called it not only the best movie ever made about the movies, but also a great entertainment. In addition, Truffaut received an Academy Award nomination for both writing and directing the film, while Day for Night would win the Best Foreign Language Film Award. However, it is worth noting that the praise for Day for Night was not unanimous.
Because why?
Jean-Luc walked out in disgust during the middle of the film the first time he saw it, and wrote a letter to Truffaut saying, "Yesterday I saw Day for Night. Probably no one else will call you a liar, so I will. In Day for Night, you say films are big trains that go along in the night, but who is taking the train, and what class, and who is the conductor with the management's stool pigeon by his side? After Day for Night, you ought to help me so the public doesn't get the idea that we all make films like you. In other words, Godard argues that by making the constraining studio system largely absent from the film, Day for Night showcases a filmmaking process in which artists across all branches can freely and haphazardly combine their talents into a single film loosely organized by its director. It's important to note that, over the last decade since the start of the French New Wave, Godard became increasingly Marxist and his films served as vehicles for him to advocate his radical anti-capitalist politics. As such, Godard believed Truffaut was attempting to whitewash the effects of capitalism on filmmaking by making a saccharine fantasy version of it akin to propaganda. A charge that was further justified considering Day for Night was the first of Truffaut's films to be distributed by the Hollywood studio system itself. In turn, Truffaut responded with his own letter, unleashing more than a decade's worth of pent-up anger and frustration that resulted in the two filmmakers never speaking again. After taking a 2-year sabbatical, his first break from filmmaking since the start of his career, Truffaut would, over the next 9 years, direct another 8 films before dying of a stroke caused by a brain tumor at the age of 52 years old. Meanwhile, Godard, who would live for another 38 years after Truffaut's death, would regret their feud. Still, though Godard's reactions and methods for voicing his disdain for Day for Night were improper,
Mais votre cinéma, moi je trouve ça irrespirable. Je méprise le cinéma.
were his thoughts and feelings unjustified? Had Day for Night projected a fantasy or dream of filmmaking that ignored the corrosive effect the financer of a film also has on its artistic integrity?
Elle a tourné un grand film politique en Allemagne. Vous faites pas le film politique. Elle fait un film érotique, grand succès. Pourquoi vous faites pas le film érotique? J'ai un scénario très intéressant sur la pollution.
Ferrand, excusez-moi, monsieur. Ferrand, faut y aller, il y a quelque chose qui va pas, là.
Qu'est-ce qui va pas?
Non, il y a rien, mais je vais vous libérer.
On the one hand, the examples discussed here, and many more that were not present in nearly every scene of Day for Night, provide an eye-opening view into both how the director, like a composer, molds the contributions of his cast and crew, and offers resolutions to unforeseen obstacles that threaten the film's production. In both tasks, the director must act and make decisions that reflect their vision for the film. By providing this context, Truffaut expands on his initial ideas about the auteur theory to rectify its shortcomings and acknowledging the contributions of the cast and crew, thereby dispelling the notion of the all-encompassing auteur while simultaneously preserving the director's status as the author of the film. However, on the other hand, while Day for Night answers many of the critiques raised against the auteur theory, it is worth noting that Ferrand can only operate as the author of Meet Pamela because the film's financer gave him complete creative autonomy.
Non, le producteur doit rester dans l'ombre.
Meaning that he does not need to share his leadership role with the film's producer or studio executives. That said, although in Day for Night Truffaut was able to remove the role of the more extensive economic system to make his fantasy of filmmaking work, as this series has shown, in the real world, the historical context and socioeconomic environment in which a film is produced profoundly affects its authorship and cannot be ignored. Thus, one may question whether Truffaut intended Day for Night to represent studio filmmaking accurately, or simply to articulate his idealized version of it, in which commerce and art are understood to be separate and distinct entities. Following this later train of thought, given that Day for Night was released in 1973 at the height of the New Hollywood, right when studios enthusiastically embraced auteuristic American filmmakers, who in turn increasingly became overly dependent on their massive financial backers, perhaps the film is intended to offer a warning. Though the New Hollywood filmmakers had pure intentions to follow in the footsteps of the artistically liberated European filmmakers who were Truffaut's peers, as the movement progressed, the outsized financial aid of the multinational media conglomerates backing the New Hollywood corrupted their creative ambitions, causing their films to spiral out of control. This phenomenon is best captured by the production of Heaven's Gate, which film historians commonly regard as the film most single-handedly responsible for the demise of the New Hollywood. Because the director of Heaven's Gate was an auteur highly respected by the studio system, the film's producers gave him unlimited financial resources, which led to severe overindulgences, such as reconstructing entire sets for arbitrary reasons or filming less than 2 minutes of usable footage a week. As a result, Heaven's Gate's final budget, which started at $1.2 million, ballooned to $44 million. For comparison, adjusted for inflation, The 400 Blows cost Truffaut $226,000, almost 195 times less. Even Bonnie and Clyde, when adjusted for inflation, only cost $6.1 million. Not only does this immense budget inequality showcase how far the New Hollywood had strayed from its modest origins, but when Heaven's Gate only made $3.5 million upon release, it bankrupted the studio that financed it and brought an industry-wide halt to auteur films in Hollywood for over a decade.
That built up to, of course, United Artists, which was an extraordinary place, making Heaven's Gate. Now, I made a picture there, Raging Bull, at the same time. In fact, Raging Bull opened 10 days before Heaven's Gate. And when that folded, we folded too with it. The picture was hardly re-released. The establishment of the The UA executives left. It was a complete mess. Everything was really over at that point.
Thus, while Truffaut's first film, The 400 Blows, would be highly influential in Hollywood's decision to reinvent itself and extend its reign, the lessons present in Day for Night were not as closely observed, resulting in the advances the auteur theory gained during the New Hollywood era quickly being rescinded.
Day for Night is a film about show people. You are, all of you, movie people. Because that, I think this prize is yours. But if you agree with me, I will keep it for you, all right? Thank you.
Throughout this three-part series, the moments in which the Hollywood and French film industries have influenced and responded to one another in response to the developments of the auteur theory for nearly 40 years were at the forefront. During Francois Truffaut's adolescence in the 1940s and 1950s, when France was recovering from World War II, numerous Hollywood films flooded the nation's theaters. Among this stream of releases, a select few films directed by individuals who transcended the studio system's assembly-like nature made an impression on a young generation of film critics who would begin outlining the foundations of the auteur theory in their writings. Shortly after, these same critics would become filmmakers themselves and join in the scores of filmmakers from other countries who were making artistically driven films that purposely ignored the invisible style that defined commercial Hollywood films. Ironically, once the golden age of the studio system ended after the Paramount decision banned monopolistic production practices, Hollywood reinvented itself in the late 1960s by embracing the art-first style being pioneered abroad. Unfortunately, as Truffaut's theories on filmmaking evolved throughout the 1970s before fully manifesting in Day for Night, greed continued to drive the growth of the studio system until the bubble burst in 1980. By ignoring Truffaut's warning, Hollywood had fully broken away from its symbiotic relationship with the French film industry, and the art-driven films that propelled the new iteration of the studio system were called into question. Now, more than 45 years removed from this period of film history, one might argue that the studio system has still not recovered from this moment. Conversely, the legacies of the European art cinema movement in New Hollywood have become essential cornerstones in understanding the history of cinema, responsible for vastly elevating the medium into a respected art form. While modern film audiences who come across Truffaut's early attempts to define the auteur theory may find difficulty grappling with some of its archaic hang-ups, his undeniable passion for film resulted in an intense curiosity that continually probed the outer edges of its ability to articulate meaning. As such, with this series drawing to a close, I want to end on a quote Truffaut initially wrote in 1957 that prophetically connects his thoughts on the power of cinema to our present day, where access to filmmaking has become more democratized and ubiquitous. The film of the future will be even more personal than a novel, individual and autobiographical, like a confession or an intimate diary. Young filmmakers will express themselves in the first person and tell us about their personal experience. Perhaps a story of their first love or something more recent, like their political standing, a journey, an illness, their conscription, their wedding, their latest holidays, and we will almost be forced to like it because it will be both believable and new. Tomorrow's films won't be made by public servants of the camera, but by artists for whom shooting a movie is an exciting and fantastical adventure. Tomorrow's movie will be similar to its director, and the audience's size will be proportionate to the amount of people that the director is friends with. Tomorrow's film will be an act of love. To ensure you don't miss any future Celluloid Cinema content, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching this series.